You're giving me a broken back, a heart attack, I'll surely crack. You're digging me an early grave, I'm up to leave before I am back. But for a love like what you've got, you know that I'll do it. And for a love like what you've got, I'll keep on doing it. Do it, do it, do it, do it.
Been asked to read out a letter that came from a friend and contemporary of Peter Graham's, Oscar Cregan in Cork. Can you convey my best wishes to today's Peter Graham Memorial meeting? A long-standing family commitment tonight prevents me from travelling to Dublin. I met Peter after he moved to London in 1970. He used to attend meetings of the Irish Civil Rights Solidarity Campaign and the Frank King Committee. He was attracted to the Fourth International in spite of differences on the national question and misgivings about a prominent Irish member of the International Marxist Group. Peter joined the IMG in autumn 1970. Bob Purdy's memoirs describe this in detail. We travelled together to Brussels in autumn 1970 for a European rally of the Fourth International, and this trip gave Peter the opportunity to do a bit of double jobbing. Make of that what you will. We went to various IMG weekend schools that winter in London, Oxford and Birmingham. Peter returned to Dublin in spring or early summer 1971. I met him in London in September of that year when he and another Dublin young socialist, a talented economist, travelled to London for a weekend series of talks given by Ernest Mandel. They took advantage of the meeting to have a detailed discussion with Mandel on the national question in Ireland. Peter afterwards told me that they were very satisfied with the outcome of the discussions. Oscar Cregan, Cork. Right. 45 years ago, on October the 25th, 1971, a 25-year-old man from across the river, from Reginald Street in the Liberties, was tortured and murdered in a top-floor flat at 101 St Stephen's Green. That man was Peter Graham. He was both a Trotskyist and a member of the often little known and very little written about Saor Éire action group. Although Trotskyism had appeared previously in Ireland, we can date its uninterrupted presence from the late 60s and early 1970s. This was the period which saw the arrival of the revolutionary Marxist group, the League for a Workers' Republic, the League for a Workers' Vanguard, the Militant Tendency, the Socialist Workers' Movement. And I think all of them, other than the League for a Workers' Vanguard, which was more akin to a religious group than a political one, the rest of them still have some presence or continuation in Ireland. The SWM is today's Socialist Workers' Party and People Before Profit. The Militant transformed into the Socialist Party and the Anti-Austerity Alliance. The League for a Workers' Republic, I suppose, carries on in the guise of the Tipperary Unemployed and Workers Group, and the revolutionary Marxist group today known as Socialist Democracy. Peter was the chair of the Young Socialists, which was a relatively broad, I think, Trotskyist group that had been in some areas the unofficial section, youth section of the Labour Party. He was also a member of the Saor Éire Action Group. This was an armed organisation of a combination of militarist Republicans, physical force Republicans, and some Trotskyists, which came together in the late 60s. I think it was formally came into being in 1967. 10 years later, it was gone. It ceased to exist. In that decade, though, it had pulled off several bank robberies, some of them quite spectacular, like in Rathdrum, where they closed off the town, blocked the roads, cut the telephone wires, so on. They also saw many members arrested over those years and jailed. In 1970, the government claimed that Saor Éire was planning to kidnap government ministers, and as a result, the government was seriously considering internment without trial in the south. Interesting, among those who defended Saor Éire against both the legal and the publicity barrage were two brothers, Paddy and Seamus Healy, Just in that Paddy went on to be elected President of the Teachers' Union of Ireland, and Seamus, of course, today is the TD for Tipperary. Throughout its existence, almost a decade, Saor Éire only issued one political statement of any length of more than a page that I've been able to come across. That was its manifesto, which was published in the British Trotskyist paper Red Mole in May 1971. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing else written from the time of any substance about Saor Eire's politics or goals, so very open to correction on that. In 1973, 8 prisoners, Saor Eire prisoners in Portlaoise, announced that they were resigning from the organisation, that they were severing all connection with it. They included people like Joe Dillon and Simon O'Donnell. They issued a statement saying that they regarded the people running Saor Éire at that stage as, I think, essentially being more interested in criminality than politics, and therefore they wanted no further connection with the organisation. And a couple of years later, by 1975, Saor Éire went out of, the remnant Saor Éire went out of existence, particularly after the killing of Larry White down in Cork by the official IRA. Larry White is also the man widely suspected of torturing and killing Peter Graham. I believe there was a long line of people queuing up in the mid-70s for words with Larry White. And of course, in terms of the people who defend Larry White's legacy today, well, it's members of Youth Defence in Cork, so probably nothing much more needs to be said about that. So what was Saor Éire Action Group? What was its connection to Trotskyism? Our speaker this evening, Rayner Lysaght, is not only the author of many works that you will have seen, like the story of the Limerick Soviet, the making of Northern Ireland, the basis of its undoing, the Republic of Ireland, so he's also a lifelong Trotskyist. He was also a comrade and friend of Peter's. And this evening I hope Rayner will share some of his memories of those times and address some of the questions thrown up by the events of what happened almost half a century ago. Over to you, Rayner.
Well, thank you, Alan. I would say that this meeting was not what we originally intended. The organisers had hoped to set up a panel to commemorate Peter, but it is difficult to recruit speakers after such a long time. And after an event, details remain tragic but unclear. You're left with a pair of us, and whether we were adequate to the occasion is for you to judge. Peter Graham died before he could fulfil his promise, and he had plenty of it. He had energy, intelligence and dedication. More definitely, he had a brilliant empathy with people, men and women alike. Apart, presumably, from his assassins, it was not possible to bear a grudge against him. One comrade in Irish Solidarity work in London clashed with him to a point of anger, yet wept tears a few weeks later when his murder was reported. He had a relaxed, sometimes mischievous personality. On one occasion, when the group of which he was a member, not the Irish section of the Fourth International, had taken it discipline to the point of refusing a member early departure from a meeting, and in fact alienated that member permanently, he took pleasure on the next occasion when he was chair in prolonging the proceedings for everyone past pub closing time. Yet this attitude on personal issues, when combined with an uncompromising yet undogmatic attitude to principle. He was not a theorist, he left no analytic writings. He told me once, half-jokingly, that Lenin was more successful in his aims than Trotsky because he was better at persuading people to accept his line, which is true, but not the whole truth. Nonetheless, his political career was a search for the organisational means by which to bring his class, the working people of Ireland, all Ireland, to achieving state power. Whether he had discovered such an instrument when he was murdered will never be known, nor will the way by which he believed he had made his discovery. What can be said is that his search showed that he was not satisfied with the easy solutions to his problem. This refusal to accept these answers was a political strength, but many would claim that it was more than negated by its alleged contribution to his death, as indeed would be if this were the case. We don't know. He began his career in the Communist Party, the Irish Workers' Party as it was then called, but concluded that his strategy was not the revolutionary one necessary to establish the Workers' Republic. Characteristically, he would tell how his former comrades in the Irish Workers' Party would denounce him as petty bourgeois for the breaking with them, and then some of them met him in his working clothes doing his job as an electrician. They stopped. He worked with the Young Socialists, joining swiftly in turn the Irish Workers' Group, the League for a Workers' Republic, the Saor Éire Action Group, and then via its British section, the Fourth International. He was preparing the International's Irish section, the Revolutionary Marxist Group, when he died. These organisational changes may make Peter sound like a left-wing Stephen Donnelly, yet his perspective was far clearer. Unlike Donnelly, even in that Deputy Social Democratic spurt, he had a clear recognition of the reality of class distinction and the need to end it through the seizure of power by the workers. When he joined the Irish Workers' Party, it was the most obvious organisation committed to this. He left it because he could see that its commitment was insufficient to produce a strategy to this end. He found the IWG Group too organised and left the League for a Workers' Republic because he considered his perspective on Northern Ireland, this, by the way, was, of course, when the Troubles were starting in 1969, too pragmatic to be revolutionary. He recognised that socialist revolution in Ireland was likely to develop from the democratic struggle for unity, and he has yet to be proven wrong. Like many at the time, he looked to Latin America for a model organisation and left the LWR for the Folkistas of Saor Éire. When he went to Britain, it was natural for him to join the International Marxist Group, which was influenced somewhat by the same ideas. Nonetheless, he had learnt its weakness. The RMG, the Revolutionary Marxist Group, was not to be a FOCO, but a Marxist propaganda body. In all, Peter Graham and I shared a flat for the total of 2 years. The first stint was in a highly unhygienic basement in Hume Street. The second, after his return from London, the St. Stephen's Green bedsitter, which was 110, by the way, not 101, but whatever. I cannot remember many outstanding anecdotes that would show him as a live person. He was generous. After the founding meeting of the Dublin Young Socialists, he chose his members pizzas. Admittedly, it was a small gathering. The only time I saw him afraid was when we went to Derry on the 8th of October 1968, to be chased down the waterside by the rioting RUC, and I must say I doubt whether he was as afraid as I was. He had a ear for music. He liked the Dubliners, and he liked Jimi Hendrix. On his 21st birthday, he was delighted to get the latest Jimi Hendrix album, and he played it incessantly. In St. Stephen's Green, we had to work out a schedule for his love life not to intrude on what was for me then a period of celibacy. And there were always politics, whether we were opposed to each other, as in Hume Street over the break with the Irish Workers' Group, or in agreement on strategy, as in St. Stephen's Green. We argued often politically. Had he lived, would he have made a difference? He would have done so, but probably not enough of one to change the overall passage of Irish history at the time. Then there were reasons for this, international and national. While the world's left movements were fermenting, producing much that was crack-brained, but also some publications that were valuable, and a few that are still. This ferment influenced Ireland, where the left, such as it had been only too happy to take its inspiration from very selective writings of Connolly. Indeed, the complete works of Connolly are still a pipe dream. It was nearly always the first, the least useful of the international influence that had the greatest effect at the time. Maoists looking into a little red book of the chairman's quotations to try and fit the Chinese experience into an Irish straitjacket. Some Republicans trying to bring the FOCO to Ireland, while others turned in the name of socialism to the strategies pioneered by the German revisionists 3/4 of a century previously. And of course our fellow Trotskyists most of whom were guided by groups, not in China nor in Latin America, but in England, at least one of which saw Ireland only as a source of demo fodder for the real revolution that was to take place across the water. Our adherence to this Fourth International Strategy saved us from this. We were not able to escape altogether from even acolytes of the British, and in one notable case, the French section coming to tell us how to rebel. Nor, faced with the stupefying Philistinism of the revisionist left and the accomplished fact of the armed struggle, could we avoid sharing the Provost's illusions in the latter. The Tower of Babel produced similarly confused practice. Irish positions on the national questions were well on the way to becoming polarised into two erroneous camps. On the one hand, there were the reformists with a position of reforming the Irish Orange State counties by getting Westminster to impose on it a Bill of Rights to limit the powers of any majority government. This might have had a small effect had it been the original programme of the Northern Civil Rights Movement in the mid-60s, but that would have meant abandoning its baiting slogan of British rights for British citizens. In any case, it was introduced after the Royalist invasion of the ghettos had escalated the crisis. Against the reformists were the revolutionary nationalists, mainly of the Provisional Republican movement, but still including the officials, now the Workers' Party, though they would abandon revolutionary methods within a year. The common ground was the traditional Republican strategy of physical force to drive the occupying British army into the sea. Both opposing camps shared the decisive weakness. They saw the struggle as being limited to the six-county province, with the people of no property in the rest of Ireland acting only as supporters. For them, the struggle was to be in practice one of a militant minority, of a rigid political minority, to either win or defeat a majority at the six-county that had been satisfied with the unreformed status quo and backed in that by what was still a major imperialist state. The only people who recognised that the revolutionary struggle as a whole had to become an all-Ireland one were, apart from the tiny group that we were building, the People's Democracy. Moreover, our members were understandably more excited by the possibilities for interventions at this time than in learning the why and the wherefore, let alone the means of reaching the why and the wherefore. In all modesty, I was arguably the best informed member of the organisation, but my knowledge made me wish sometimes only that I could be as certain about anything as my comrades were about everything. The final problem was simply money. Propaganda per head tends to cost more than agitation, and of course agitation must involve larger numbers. The disproportionate numbers of students rather than employed workers in our organisation did not help. Some of us were able to put extra money in the kitty, but it was small compared to what was needed to maintain a premises and a regular publication, not to mention necessary pamphlets on specific issues required to try to offset not just the bourgeois media, but the less accurate analyses of our rivals. Looking back, we might have done better to have abandoned our aspirations for the premises, as the rivals did, and as we had to do at last, for this would have created other problems. Yet we did produce a regular paper, we did keep the premises, and even publish one or two pamphlets. We held small meetings and joined other organisations in various campaigns, including one which included others, the chairman here, Alan here, that prevented the Murrays from being hanged and blew a hole through the possibility of reviving the penalty of capital punishment at this time. Worked in the movement, women's movement, and against coercive powers, north and south. Our great weakness was in economic struggles. The recessive conditions of the 70s were not conducive to movements other than those of the unemployed. And as usual, they were open to the attraction of the reflationary capitalist policies of Fianna Fáil. It's arguable too that we were too modest in putting ourselves forward. Nonetheless, by the end of the decade, we had united with the Rayner O'Connor Lysaght democracy and looked forward to greater success a vision in which our Marxist analysts failed us. Could Peter Graham's presence have allowed us to do decisively better? Certainly had the confidence and flamboyance that we tended to lack. We might also be able to compensate somewhat for our industrial weakness, but too many conditions would have been against us with him as they were for us without him. We were at a disadvantage in that the single largest revolutionary force at the time was the Republican movement. Today there are signs that the Stormont settlement is collapsing, but there's no such single movement of revolutionary nationalists ready to topple it. The trouble is there's no other organisation ready to take up the challenge. Yet, even if the struggles in the 26th county state do provide the spark for the workers' people seizure of state power, that achievement will make it order relevant, and if only in self-defence, it will force the new Workers' Republic to place its ending on the agenda. Northern Ireland exists to prevent that sort of thing. Today, as in Peter's time, it seems that the only group willing to do this is what is now socialist democracy, in all honesty. And although we know more, our organ numbers are fewer than they were then. Too many revolutionary socialists believe that the struggle for state power is the economy stupid. And this is the central truth, but arising out of it is a mass of socio-political issues, not least the problem of the state itself. Concentration on economics can lead to reformism, to making the working people immediate gains that will be negated by the capitalist state, as they are. Equally, as has been shown over the last quarter century, concentration on the social issues within existing class society tends to reinforce acceptance of the class structure and abandonment of the immediate economic problems of working people. Too rigid compartmentalism is a barrier to working class state power. All this may seem irrelevant to the subject of this meeting. In fact, it would not be being held were Peter not a revolutionary. What a nice guy and all that, but if he were not a revolutionary, he wouldn't be here. He would want us to chart a course, particularly in prison conditions, even if only to start discussion. And at the moment, it might be advisable to be guided under certain headings. Firstly, there's the need for a revolutionary party, not just to propagandize for the revolution, but to organize or to lead it. This is in many ways the most difficult of all the tasks. The divisions of the left, particularly in these islands, are many and often toxic. No doubt some are maintained partly as ego trips for their leaders, but the divisions between them arise out of real disagreements on strategic issues and most problematically on international ones. It should be possible to learn from the fate of such disagreements and to come to some principled rapprochement. In practice, such a solution is rare and dependent on the objective context. As a humble member of one of the smallest surviving propaganda groups in Ireland, this may seem like sour grapes. We do not have a presence in Dáil Éireann, where there are now 8 or 9 self-proclaimed revolutionary socialist deputies, an unthinkable number 50 years ago, but not one of them of socialist democracy. However, it was not always thus. At one time we had our public representatives. It is good to have self-proclaimed genuine socialists in the Dáil and at Stormont, but they are victors and skirmishes in a war in which first major battle will be the establishment of the Workers' Republic, itself the initial major achievement of the world struggle for socialism. Secondly, the said Workers' Republic and its achievements must be at the centre of the aims of the party. It may be necessary to defend and expand its democratic institutions against the forces of coercion and the political right, but that is to defend democracy, not the state itself. Enough democracy will in fact weaken this capitalist state and make it easier to build that of the working peoples. At the same time, the latter will have to be built inside the former, smash and replace it. Revolutionary socialists must remember this or stop being revolutionary or even socialist. 3. Irish unity cannot be fudged. Quite apart from all the nationalist criticisms, the present border exists to divide the workers in a way that it does not divide their bosses. There are signs that its effectiveness is lessening. Nonetheless, even at the present rate, such a process, a reformist process, is likely to take a couple of generations. Immediately, the need is to keep in view the socio-political differences and the economic resemblances between the state and the northern province. How long the Stormont Agreement can last is uncertain, but if it fails, there has to be a movement in the Republic ready to mobilise, not for the agreement itself, but for the democratic solution of a united Ireland, a working people's Ireland, brought by the organisations of that class. And finally, these are the problems posed by those said mass organisations. The sectarianism of the small groups is paralleled by the reformism of the bureaucracies. Our duties remain to fight all restrictions on working class rights, CEDA, FMP, etc., and to demand full democratic right within the bodies as preparation for the Workers' Republic. These basic principles would seem to be central to the aims advocated by Peter Graham. Thank you.
Well, we will have plenty of time now for people to share any memories they have of Peter, of those times, to make any comments or ask any questions of Rayner. So now, who wants to kick off? Des.
Yes, I knew Peter Graham at the age of 16, 17, and he was a great influence on me and still is to this day. How we met was funny in this grotty flat in Hume Street. Myself and a friend in Nevin College in Female South Secondary School, we decided, we were involved in a small group called the Young Neighbourly, and we decided we weren't satisfied. We were going to either join on the youth movement or the Young Socialists. And by chance, we went down to see Peter Graham first in the basement flat in Hume Street. And of course, once we met Peter, we were hooked. He was an enormously charismatic figure. We were only 16 at the time actually, and he was in his 20s. But there was no condescension at all. He didn't speak down to you, he accepted us straight away. Here were these two spotty teenagers coming to his flat on his Sunday afternoon off, took us straight in, talked to us. I think if he has one legacy that those who knew him could take, is that he knew how to make politics relevant to the ordinary person and bring them in. He had great leadership qualities. As Rayner has said, he had humour, and he was also an electrician in the Post and Telegraphs. He was the classic worker intellectual. And if he was alive, if he had carried on survive, I've no doubt he would be a major figure on the left. I'm thinking of Amy McCann, that type, he would have been. But he did take his course. He did. Look, he was just striking me recently that he took an unusual course for the classic Marxist movement, going into a small physical force organisation. Of course, the times were strange times. It was the 60s. Like, it's no accident that he was a Jimi Hendrix fan, a Dubliners fan. That's the time it was. Everything was mixed up. And I went into a strange organisation myself. That's why I wasn't around then. I came back to politics after. So it was a cauldron of different ideas and different strains of thought and cultural influence. And I'll just end on this. Next Saturday, we're talking about very timely the Dublin Housing Action Committee. And at the time, that was one of the big areas of activity of the Young Socialists. And we weren't in the leadership of it, but we were on all the marches. And we were really good. A mass movement based on people squatting that really got things going on houses and had an influence after. Young Socialists was an extraordinary organisation. People like Rayner in it. John Goodwillie, some of you would know. Charlie Board. Charlie Board took me aside one day and said, "You're very good, you should join the Labour Party." I never was a member of the Labour Party. But Paddy Healy, Seamus Healy, it really was a collection. And it was quite broad in a way, but when things got going, I got there was some splits and everything. But I'm really happy to be able to add my voice to an extraordinary person who I liked very much, and it was a huge shock when he was killed in the manner in which he was killed. Thank you.
Right, anybody else?
Yeah. Peter, I met Peter in, I think it was at the time O'Neill's of Maryland Road. And very quickly he became my best friend. I was a member founder of Students for Democratic Action in UCD, and a member of the Young Socialists. And from that particular meeting became a member of the League for a Workers' Republic, because it was he and Paddy Healy who influenced me. And, you know, we became great friends, which later I thought was, in retrospect, it's kind of strange because, you know, this middle-class college student and an electrician from the Liberties, but literally became like that. And I can give you, Rayner, whom I remember well, he was a bit short on the anecdotes as he admitted himself, but I'll tell you one. From 15 Hume Street, which I always remember. Another man who was present at this was Johnny Morrissey, who was a member also of Saor Éire. And he didn't realise that Peter and I were such good friends. And what happened was Peter and I were rowing at the time, as friends will from time to time. And we were actually, I think it was over a young lady. And we were yelling away at each other in this horrible basement. Rayner remembers it well, I remember it well, terrible place. And Johnny was just sitting there looking at us. And after a while, I went off in a huff. Peter stayed there, and we met the next day. Friends again, no problem. I just end by thanking the organisers for providing this occasion for us, and Rayner for his talk. It's been many years, it's 47 I think you said, and I certainly would have attended previous commemorations if there had been, given my personal regard and affection for Peter, as well as the political things. But thank you very much for doing it. If it's the first one, please do it again. Maybe I just missed them in the past.
Come on, fascinating period. Somebody must have a question or a comment. Come on.
I knew Peter was involved in the socialists. I remember I just want to say, just on anecdotal stuff, it was mentioned about Peter's interest in music. He was actually quite a good friend of Bush Shields, and if people cast their minds back, at that time, the big band in Dublin, not in Ireland, the Skid Row, and Peter got Bush Shields to organise a 20th Century Festival of Music in Trinity College, with several hundred people attended, made a small fortune for us. But that's just one little angle. Just to, find out that Peter was he was quite well known around Dublin. I met Peter, the first time I met Peter was in O'Connell Street. He was with Paddy Healy and Christy Hussey, who's, I can't forget about Christy, but Christy was a kind of a major figure at that time. And they were putting up posters for an anti-war march on Vietnam. And I stopped to talk to them because, like Des, I was thinking of joining the Conway Youth, because Conway Youth had quite a high profile at the time, were very active. And when I saw Young Socialists, I thought, well, find out now what this is all about. And it was Paddy and Christy joked about what they did. They said, we spend most of our time in food drinking, trying to pitch to the young person. But Peter actually took me aside and explained what the politics of the organisation was. and I really appreciated that. I was invited to a meeting of Young Socialists in the old ATGW hall in Marlborough Street, and as Des said, one of the people there was John Goodwill. The speaker was Johnny Byrne, who was a lifelong socialist, lifelong Marxist, lifelong Trotskyist, and he'd been involved in the original Trotskyist movement that existed here in the 30s and 40s, and he was involved also with the Trotskyist movement in Britain. On the question of Peter's politics, it was a very strange time. It was a time when there was going to be a major political explosion, and there was a kind of a sense of that around the place. The other big thing in Peter's thinking was the need for an international organisation, for Irish socialists to be involved with socialists in other countries, and that's why he was so attracted to the idea of the Fourth International. I don't know if people know what the Fourth International is. It was founded by Trotsky, arising out of the collapse of revolution and the rise of Stalinism in Russia. And its aim was to replace what was the Third International, which was the international that had been sponsored originally by the Russian Revolution, by Lenin in particular. And Peter felt that that tradition that came out of the Russian Revolution through the left opposition, through Trotsky, should be continued. That's the type of politics that he had. The idea, for example, of linking the national question and the social and economic issues was central to the idea of the parent revolution.
Kevin?
Yeah, I didn't really know Peter. I just seen him at meetings from a distance, so I can't say I have anything to say about his personality. But he was quite impressive, and I was at his funeral because I recognised that he was a fairly special person. But just that time, people talking about how much preferment there was both here and internationally. I think that you have to see that had an effect on how people reacted, and we were swayed by events. I mean, I remember at that time there was groups like the two Comrades in Argentina, in Uruguay, stopping trains full of food and distributing to the poor. The guerrillism was in the air very much so, not just in terms of the traditions in Ireland, but it was globally. And the Vietnam War was happening at the time, which are much more significant than these folky groups in Latin America. But that wave passed, and the Fourth International was influenced by that, and they actually had an orientation towards towards guerrillism, which turned out to be a big mistake, because they were defeated, but there was still the working class. But Rayner gave I'm a member of social democracy, but Rayner made a fairly exaggerated view of what we represent. We're just the remnants of people's democracy. And you can see, I'm retired. I have no connection with the workforce. I don't pretend to have any influence on the workforce. But I do think what we've been trying to do is stimulate some sort of debate, discussion as to where we are today. And I think that's what people like Peter would have done.
I think I met Peter one time and we had a discussion, all right, I won't swear to it, but at least I knew of him at the time, that we way back. But one thing disturbs me a little here this evening. I know he died a rather mysterious death. Not quite sure, I don't think anyone really knows except those that were involved. But the lecturer actually named a person that probably had done it, I think Larry White. And whether he did or whether he didn't, I know that every year in Cork there's a monument where Larry White was assassinated. Still a mystery who assassinated White. I think you said yourself there were people queuing up. But I think it's a very dangerous and very unfair thing to name somebody, because I have, in my experience over the years, known of people that were accused of certain things that they most certainly weren't. And there are up to 200 people every year at a commemoration in Cork at Barry White's monument. A lot of them are very young people. A lot of them are patriotic people. He's put down as a man who was in the markets area and defended Belfast, and sometimes there's reels come from Belfast. And you know, I think that thing about the whole thing, I think it was not definite proof. I don't think it should be introduced, because maybe you're doing a great disservice to somebody. And I do know that people in Cork, certain numbers of them, are convinced that it was the officials who would have known them at the time, that there's some, and that is definitely that. But to come to a meeting and hear a guy named that was not in the officials, I just think, maybe injustice and charity, I cannot confuse young people in Cork who think this was a clean-cut guy who gave his life for Ireland. I think we have enough problems already as Irish revolutionaries that to be making our own problems and dirty in the waters, you know. Either there is proof of something, others not. But that kind of conjecture helps nobody. It sickens other idealistic young people coming in. Oh, fuck it, I'm having nothing to do with that type of thing. I think there's been too much of this innuendo and unproven allegations down the years, and it's time it stopped.
And I didn't mention, as you know, I didn't mention Larry White at all, and I don't know if he did.
But I apologise.
Oh no, it was me that mentioned Larry White. I
prefer, as I say, I have suspicions who may or may not have murdered Pete, but I don't. I mean, I'm not going to do it here. I mean, it'd be rather ridiculous, really, if we started a sort of a feud on the subject, especially if it could well be we got it wrong. I agree. So I mean, it seems to be generally agreed that the people who bumped off Larry White were involved in the stickies. The guy was sentenced. I never heard that there was any doubt, at that time about it. I wouldn't know about. As I say, I'm not prepared to say X will point the finger at anybody publicly on the who murdered Pete. I mean, it's just, as I say, suspicions and it's long past the time.